start shortly.
Right, order. Welcome to this afternoon's session of the Foreign Affairs Committee and our inquiry into British-Turkish relations. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for making yourselves available to give us evidence today, and particular thanks to Dr. Erdogan for coming in from the United States to be with us. I wonder if you could just formally introduce yourselves for the record.
My name is Yüksel Alp Aslandoğan. I am the Executive Director of the Alliance for Shared Values. It's a non-profit based in New York with 6 regional local affiliates.
My name is Özcan Keles. I am a PhD candidate at the University of Sussex in Human Rights. I'm a non-practicing barrister and I'm the chairperson of the Dialogue Society. Mr. Chairman, would I be permitted just to make a quick, some preambular points before we begin in quick succession?
Well, it depends how quick.
I can be super quick. I just wanted to thank the committee for inviting us here and have it on record that we did not lobby the committee to attend, but rather are responding to the request to be here. We are under considerable pressure, both as a movement but also individually, and we offer this evidence under that pressure. So if there is any incoherence, please press us, but cognizant of that fact. And we don't speak on behalf of Gülen, but we do believe that the evidence that we've provided, both in writing and hopefully in oral, reflects the common Hizmet perspective. Thank you.
No, and thank you very much. Thank you very much. And there is a significant submission that we've received, which is associated with your position. What I would also like to invite you to do, if at the end of today's session there is, in light of your evidence of the way the questioning goes, you think there are more things you wish to say, then to give you the opportunity then to submit more written evidence to us in light of if you think there are things that have not been got across properly, or you would have liked to have the opportunity to say to us. There will be a division at some time during the course of our proceedings, and that'll interrupt us for 10 to 15 minutes, I anticipate. Obviously the Gulenists have suddenly appeared on the world's agenda. I suspect it was a movement not terribly well understood by anybody outside Turkey. It might be not terribly well understood inside Turkey as well. And I wonder if you could simply begin by giving us a sense of the organisation, and then how the organisation relates to the wider movement of people that might be identified as being more widely associated with Gülenism.
We refer to it as Hizmet, but Hizmet or Gülen movement really means the same thing. Hizmet is a Turkish word which means service. Hizmet is an Islamically inspired social movement in terms of what it is by nature. That is what we believe it is. It began in the 1960s in Turkey as a religious congregation in Izmir. By the 1990s, it had evolved into an education nationwide movement in Turkey. And by 2000 and onwards, it had become a transnational civil society movement. Its main focus is on education, dialogue, relief work. In terms of education, the movement has founded over 2,000 schools in over 160 countries and more dialogue organizations. The genius of Hizmet is that it is faith-inspired in its motivation, but it is faith-neutral in its manifestation. In other words, it takes people that are religiously inspired, takes that, and channels it towards inclusive projects that don't target on the basis of ethnicity or religion, but targets on the basis of wider society's needs. Its aim is to really answer the question, a central question, which is, what does it mean to be a Muslim in the 21st century? How can we express our faith, which is true to the dynamics and the core values and the basic principles of our faith, but at the same time is cognizant of contemporary culture, democracy and human rights and secularism. So Hizmet aims to provide a roadmap that allows us to be good Muslims, but at the same time good citizens, and to understand that these are mutually reinforcing. That is what the movement is, and you will have people within this movement that are core participants who are inspired by it. There are people that...
What is a core participant?
Well, somebody who is inspired by it, is moved by it, and believes that they should positively contribute to it in a way in which they can. So it's somebody that typically will give some time if they have it, or if they can't give time, they might support it financially, or if they can't do that, they may do it through expertise. It's something that, it's a very personal matter, and social movements are usually matters of personal affiliation. It's not a membership, it's not a party, it's not a corporation where you have clear membership, and we don't have that. It's free entry, and it's free exit. So people that feel positively moved by it and want to support it will do, and people that don't, won't, and that's perfectly okay.
Dr. Azam, you've, I think, acted as Fethullah Gülen's spokesman on occasion in the United States.
It's an inaccurate specification.
Mr.
Gülen doesn't have a spokesman.
Enlighten us as to what the accurate specification is.
Well, we call our organization, and sometimes personally myself, as an authentic voice from within Hizmet movement. Mr. Gülen doesn't have a spokesperson. He speaks when he is able to, when he wants to, and he regularly gives short talks which are actually published on the internet.
Right. Perhaps I can move on into one of those talks. You explained about the certain degree of anxiety with which you come to give us evidence, and in those circumstances, the pressure you feel under, and you obviously now get some questions which reflect that pressure. So, and it's your opportunity then to give some answers to that. We have had an explanation of your organisation sent to us in the wake of the events of the 15th of July from our opposite numbers in the Turkish Parliament. And they wrote to us, and amongst what they said to us about your organisation was that talking about the schools you refer to, that the schools have been the backbone of your recruitment, although other qualified recruits were allowed in after strict observation, adaptation and dedication period. It has been illegally nested within state institutions by the human capital raised in their own schools and other educational institutions, where the network members were placed via nepotist schemes. Thus it managed to penetrate into state institutions through their disciples, who were subject to religious and ideological teaching from the very early years of their education in cell-like formations. The disciples were raised as soldiers, police, prosecutors, judges, intelligence officers and teachers by illegally obtaining questions, answers provided before taking the specific entrance exams to qualify for degree-specific university, college, academy programs, or before taking specific selection placement exams for employment and state in public institutions. In this way, the Gulenists have been eagerly organised within politics, judiciary, education, bureaucracy, media and business, whichever are relevant in the countries where they are active, without ever forgetting their loyalty to their roots and the spiritual leader Fethullah Gülen. Now, I just want to juxtapose that evidence which we received from the Turkish Foreign Affairs Committee with what I understand is an account of one of these messages from Mr. Gülen himself. And in one of his famous sermons in the late 1990s, he advised his followers to continue living incognito inside the veins of the state until enough power has been amassed. You must move in the veins of the system without anyone noticing your existence until you reach all the power centres. You must wait until such time as you have gotten all the state power, until you have brought to your side all the power of the constitutional institutions in Turkey. Until that time, any step taken would be too early, like breaking an egg without waiting the full 40 days for it to hatch. I'm sure you are inordinately familiar with that quote, and possibly not quite so familiar with the challenge that's been put by our opposite numbers in Turkey. We invite you both to comment on effectively the charge.
If I can begin and try to keep it in as quickly as possible. The first part of what you read, Mr. Chairman, it's the argument of infiltration and the parallel state argument, which is what the government makes. And when we hear the term infiltration, we ask ourselves, why not the word integration? You see, these words are very loaded and they're used for a particular purpose. And these words are in fact used against our current President Erdogan to keep him out of politics by the previous regime. So it's important that we understand what these terms mean. When you have 800 of the best schools in the country, as the movement had, and the rest of the educational system is not so great, it is a statistical inevitability that you will have a disproportionate number of your alumni in the private and the public sector. That is just numbers. Mm-hmm. We have 57% of our permanent secretaries in this country are Oxbridge graduates. So are we suggesting that Oxford or Oxbridge has created a parallel state here? The Turkish government is taking something which is plausible, presence, because of the quality of the schools and the number of them, and conflating it with something else called parallel. Yeah, so that's the huge problem, and there's no evidence there to back it up.
Yeah, but the only problem is it's juxtaposed with the statements of Mr. Gulen in the 1990s, which then gives that accusation legs, because that's what you're presenting is what he suggested people should do 20 years ago.
Mr. Chairman, that's absolutely right. But I imagine that, and I wouldn't, but I imagine that if I did ask you to read the paragraph above that extract or the paragraph below it, you would be unable to do so, and that's no offence to yourself, sir. Because there is that extract, sir, is completely decontextualised. There is no paragraph before, paragraph after. That extract is also made out of 4 sentences, each of them perhaps uttered by Gülen, but there will be dots in between. They were put together. We don't know what he said in between. Fethullah Gülen was tried on the basis of that extract that you read in a case that lasted from 2000 to 2006 by the staunchly secular judiciary in Turkey, and he was acquitted of it. Fethullah Gülen's legal team asked the prosecutor for that extract to be expertly analysed. It was denied. Fethullah Gülen's legal team asked for the context from which that extract was taken, and it was not provided. Until this day, we do not have it, and it is not available. So that is a case on which Gülen has been acquitted. It is decontextualised, and we know how decontextualised text can be completely misrepresented. What does he mean by you? Who is he referring to? Who does he mean by us? What does he mean by in between those sentences? That is completely out of context. And as I say, the movement has 2,000 schools. They suggest that there's hundreds of these schools in the United States. Well, if this movement was a nefarious, fundamentalist, infiltrating organization, I don't believe that the United States of America, with the greatest intelligence capacity in the world, would allow for this movement to have schools there as there are in other parts of the world.
Is there a full text we can have?
There isn't. We don't have it.
If I may add a couple of things. First, I just want to say that within the movement, we do not prefer to use the term, and we actually dislike the term Gülenist because, first of all, it puts too much emphasis on one person. Mm-hmm. And secondly, we perceive the movement as a movement of values. Certainly, that was my personal experience, the way I was attracted to the movement and became a participant. And for the people that I know, that's the case, that this movement stands for values, not for one person. That person is very old now. He's going to pass away maybe soon, but the movement will be there to represent the same values. With regard to that excerpt that has been brought to our attention many times before, unfortunately, what is forgotten is Mr. Gülen actually faced questions about the excerpt in the past, and he answered them, but nobody actually quotes his answers. So in one of his interviews with, I believe, Mehmet Gündem of Milliyet Daily many years ago, in the maybe mid-2000s or early 2000s, he said very clearly that he never, ever had the purpose of overtaking the state or changing the nature of Turkish state, turning it to some other form of state. That was never his intention. And his comments were taken out of context. If I remember correctly, he was addressing a group of members of the judiciary who were suffering under a minister who publicly declared discriminatory hiring and promotion practices. And this group of members of judiciary were planning some kind of an uprising, like a either violent or otherwise vocal rejection of the minister. And these comments were given in that context, and they were also combined with other comments made in other circumstances. When the video was first aired in Turkey, I believe that was 98 or 99, there were two additional video segments added to the excerpt that you just read. One of them was a comment separately about the oratorical power of Atatürk, where Gülen was criticizing Atatürk's oratorial skills. And the segment at the end was about his experience as a child. One of his relatives was a midwife, and he was talking about the difficulty of giving birth to a child. So these three segments were patched together and aired on Turkish TV to give the impression that he is criticizing Atatürk, and then he's talking about painful birth, therefore he is after taking over the state. So this is clearly a doctored video, and it was rejected by the courts. And just again for the record, Mr. Gülen acknowledged Atatürk as a military and political genius in his other talks. So Mr. Gülen responded to those allegations, made it clear that he has never opposed a moderate form of secularism or democracy or the republican form of government.
So you see, this is what is confusing, is that in 2006, the Gulenist movement, and I use the word Gulenist rather than Hizmet or Fito, because the Gulenist is at least neutral in the context of which you're obviously under examination with the charges coming, serious charges about association with the events of 15th of July from Turkey. So that's why I'm using that term. Is that in the infiltration into the judiciary would suggest that Mr. Gülen was probably in quite good shape in front of the judiciary in 2006. That the extent of infiltration into Turkish society, which ran alongside at that stage and was complementary to the objectives of the AKP, and there I'm going to have to hold it whilst we go and do our democratic duty, and we will be back, if colleagues can be back for 3:30, please. Order, sitting is suspended. We're chorus, there are three of us, others will drift back in, and it's 3:30, so we'll start again. So, Dr. Alejandro, the point I was going to put was that you and Mr. Kelesh, on the answer on this much debated infiltrationist text, if I can put it like that, from Mr. Gülen. When this was tried in 2006, it would have been the moment when the movement and the then ruling AKP were in lockstep. And you might then suggest that the judiciary in those who would have been rather unlikely to come with a negative verdict towards Mr. Gülen at the time. And of course what's happened is the breakdown of that relationship between the Gülen movement, or whatever name one chooses to give it, and the ruling party. And that's obviously accelerated over the last 3 years or so, and I want to come back to that at the end of our session. But I just want one more question to put to you, is that people associated with the movement would be a primary loyalty would be to the movement or to the state?
May I? Yes. On the question that or the comment that you made about the alliance, so-called, and perhaps that the judiciary let him off at the time.
Yeah.
The case was from 2000 to 2006, so it was quite some time.
Yeah.
It wasn't just within 1 year. The case was appealed and went to the highest court in the land, and Gülen's acquittal was upheld by the highest court in the land. So that narrative, projective thinking would suggest and would require Hizmet-inspired people or the AKP people to have then infiltrated the Court of Appeal, the highest court there, which clearly they did not. And in 2008, the AKP...
They might have known which side their bread was buttered. Judges are not immune from influence.
Of course they're not, yes. But in 2000, absolutely. And what demonstrates that is in 2008, the judiciary in Turkey launched a case against the AKP to ban the AKP, to close the party and ban 70 of its leading members, including our current president and most of the cabinet. So, if the AKP were influential in the judiciary at the time, or Hizmet people, it's extremely unlikely that they would have initiated a case to ban themselves.
So, but answering the last question I put before I turn to Mike Gates.
The last question, yes.
Perhaps I should be slightly more specific. If you're a civil servant and you are a Gulenist, Hizmet member, Hizmet supporter, Where's your first loyalty?
Well, as I mentioned in my first comments, this Hizmet movement is centered on certain values, and one of these values is upholding the rule of law, patriotism, commitment to your country. So sympathy or support for the movement is not necessarily contradicting. To the contrary, it is actually supportive of citizenship and being loyal to your government. So therefore, if somebody is sharing these values...
Is loyalty to your country, loyalty to your government?
Loyal to your country and loyal to your government. Both of them.
If you're in a state position, if you're a member of the judiciary, your loyalty is to the constitution and to the state, of course, due to the separation of powers.
Mike Gates.
Can I ask you, firstly, following on from the answer you've just given, are members of your movement active in political parties across the spectrum in Turkey?
To my knowledge, there are movement participants in almost every party. I'm not able to say in every single party, but I do know people who are affiliated with the major opposition parties in Turkey.
You mean the CHP, the Republican
yes,
People's
yes.
Party?
Not in great numbers, but
and the nationalist MHP, would they
yes.
also be members of that?
Well, I know people who are sympathetic to Hizmet, and they are also affiliated with the opposition parties. Yes.
Can I just add to that?
Okay, but just before
please,
you do,
please.
And what about the Kurdish party, the HDP?
I know people who are sympathetic to Hizmet, who have voted for the HDP in the last election.
No, I wasn't asking about voting, I was asking about being members of the party.
I have no knowledge.
Because I was told, I don't know if it's true, that your movement was very hostile to the idea of the Kurdish identity and the Kurdish rights. Is that true?
Well, there is a important question, and this and related questions came up many times against Mr. Gülen and other movement participants. I should say that within the movement, it represents the Turkish society. It's like a microcosm of Turkish society. So about 15% of Turkish population are Kurds, and within the movement, there are approximately the same ratio of Kurdish citizens who are movement participants. Therefore, the movement intellectuals, Mr. Gülen, within the movement, they have always supported the cultural rights of the Kurdish citizens. And in an interview to BBC in 2014, I believe, Mr. Gülen said that he has not been against the peace process or even meeting with people who needed to be met to resolve the terrorism problem.
Okay.
Just very briefly, problems occur when we understand affiliation to the movement as membership, because I understand why people might think that it's a matter of sympathy. So therefore people will have sympathy to the movement.
So is it an ideology? If we were saying, it's not a party, but it's an ideology. Would that be too crude a description?
It's values. It's about values. It's about an idea. It's about upward social mobility. It's about marrying religion with modernity. So it's that. But my point is that people can have sympathy for that. I know people that are Alawis, for example, that are Hizmet participants. I know people that are agnostic and will be and have Hizmet sympathies.
Right. Now, your movement and your earlier remarks, you referred to this, and the written submissions that we've seen refer to the fact that there are extensive operations around the world, including in areas like education and health projects. What relationship do you have with the UK and the UK government? I mean, I must declare an interest in the sense I've met members of the Dialogue Society here, and including in my constituency. So I know that within the people of Turkish origin in London, there are people who do support the Dialogue Society. But how extensive is the contact with the UK government and UK institutions?
The movement in the UK is very small. As far as I know, there are about 15 organisations, charities that are associated with the movement in the UK. In 2013, we created a consortium called voicesinbritain.org, which says this is a Hizmet consortium, and there are about 6 members there, and Dialogue Society is one of them. And there is one independent school that is a Hizmet, founded by Hizmet-inspired people in the UK, and I'm happy to provide the name.
Where is that?
I'd rather, if you permit me to provide that in private. So the movement is small here, and our engagement with members of parliament are very limited. But that, whatever engagement we do have, when, for example, members of parliament come and speak at our events, or we've had ministers speak at our events, it's been on our website.
Do you have any relationship with any government departments here?
We, for example, no. I mean, we received funding. I'm just trying to think what that might be. We've received DCLG funding in 2009-2010 for a number of projects that we did. One of which was to look at dialogue in Islam from a theological perspective, which we published. But we haven't received central government funding or local government funding other than that. We do try to be as transparent and open. But there isn't any other tangible link that I can...
I understood. I mean, in the United States, the Gülen movement has a huge network in education, particularly with the charter schools. You haven't got the same relationship with free schools?
No, we don't. There is no free school that I know of that has any affiliation, association with the movement.
How many schools does the movement have in the United States?
Well, to answer that question properly, I think we need to understand why people in the movement get involved in education in what forms. Gülen's advocacy from the start has been about investing in education in different means for young people choosing careers in education, for wealthy people.
Could you tell me how many?
So that results in multiple forms of engagement. It has been talked about in various circles that there are over 100 campuses that were founded by people sympathetic to the movement.
100 schools in the US?
Campuses, not necessarily different school systems or different institutions.
So there will be many more schools than 100 campuses?
Well, there are different categories of education institutions. There are private schools, about several private schools that were founded by Hizmet sympathetic people. And there are other people who have gone forward to be involved in charter school movement.
So this will be a significant proportion of the US education system?
No, by no means. By no means.
Well, you can give me a sort of a rough estimate.
Well, in various reports, media reports, I have seen numbers that talk about over 100 campuses, but by no means that's a significant portion of the charter school movement. It is an important, maybe significant, small element of the movement.
Okay. And in the in the US, education is your main focus, the main focus of operation?
Well, in the US, education is one of maybe the first priority. Interfaith and intercultural dialogue and humanitarian relief. These are the 3 priorities. There is a relief foundation called Embrace Relief based in New Jersey. Started only a few years ago, and most recently they reached remarkable levels of support based on...
So that relief is you're raising funds in the US or spending in other parts of the world, is that
yeah,
right?
They are supporting projects, they are collecting funds from the US, they are spending those funds in projects like Michigan water problem or Houston flood or Haiti medical center or wells in Africa.
Okay. And in terms of your work in Africa, is it mainly focused again on education and health?
Education and humanitarian relief. Health, yes, including health, but it is not limited to just medical care. It is also about digging and maintaining wells and training professionals. There are various elements of humanitarian assistance.
Okay.
Some of them are more permanent, some of them are project-based, temporary.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Adam Holloway.
So you've got this huge sort of range of operations going on. How do you raise all this cash, and how much do you reckon you spend a year? How much do you raise and spend a year?
To answer that question, the general workings, the organizational structures within the movement needs to be looked at. According to Dr. Elizabeth Özdalga, who was the director of the Swedish Institute in Istanbul some years ago, she likened the movement to a collection of business and cultural and educational networks. So we're literally talking about hundreds of NGOs. They have their own governing boards and they have their own fundraising meetings. There have been, various estimates put, but I don't find those estimates actually meaningful.
It's got to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars, hasn't it? I mean, if you've got 2,000...
That would be a reasonable estimate.
And how's the money raised?
The money is... there's every year there'll be this event called a Hizmet program, which is a fundraising event. So businesses, professionals, teachers, whoever they may be, if they feel positively inclined, they'll come to this fundraising event where the projects will be discussed and people will pledge whatever support they think that they may be able to give throughout the year. This is usually organised once a year for each organisation or for a
and then you commit to regular giving.
And then the people will commit if they want to. Yes, it would usually be a regular donation to the relevant charity.
And usually it's going to be an annual commitment. It's a promise to donate a certain amount of money within a year.
So what would the sort of average be for a regular follower, as it were?
There is actually a study that looked into this. Dr. Helen Roziba from University of Houston, she's a sociologist, well respected in her field. She traveled Turkey and interviewed over 100 individuals from blue-collar workers to middle-scale business people to wealthy business people. And she found that the range, the proportion, the ratio of donations vary widely. There's a culture of giving that everybody gives something, but for instance, in her case, 3 blue-collar workers were coming together to support one student with a scholarship, and she also met with a wealthy businessman who was actually building a school by himself. So it's a very wide range of donations.
But this is also predicated on the idea within Islam of charitable giving, zakat and sadaqah. So it's a part of the culture. It's not something that is foreign and new.
And a final one, do you have any sort of well-known large backers?
You mean corporate backers?
Yeah, corporates or, I don't know, individuals or whatever.
Well, the largest corporate backers of Hizmet were large corporations in Turkey, the largest manufacturer of furniture in Turkey, who family members are now in jail. One of the mining and media companies, all of their assets were confiscated. They are estimated to be worth billions of dollars. He is in UK and his assets have been confiscated. So the corporate donors are either at large, out of the country, or in jail right now.
No longer corporate, basically.
Thank you. And Fluid?
The submission you gave us describes, on the one hand, an informal, loose network, and that doesn't really square with the organisation you're describing, associated with dozens of schools, lots of media outlets, a large number of companies, billions of dollars in assets. Is there not a contradiction between these two?
I believe, from recollection from what we wrote, we described it as decentralized, and we would stand by that point, that it is not a hierarchical pyramid structure that you would find in a large corporation or a political party in that sense. What you have within the movement, in terms of how it works and how it manages this, I already mentioned inspiration. That's the engine which really gets people working and donating and supporting and helping. You then have the teachings that are not esoteric, they're actually quite practical. So they'll say things like open schools and dialogue, and they'll also say things as how one should do it. Local decision making, for example, would be one. Try to avoid confrontation and be conciliatory would be another. So it tells you what to do and how to do it, and that gives you a roadmap. And then you have something called networks, and networks are operational in most social movements, and these are basically informal social networks that crisscross across the entire movement in various sizes and shapes that the participants of the movements will tap into. We all have this as individuals, but these networks are a bit more instructive in the context of social movements, and that's how information is shared, resources are discussed, that's how best practices are shared among the participants. Within the UK, just to solidify the example, I mentioned Voices in Britain, so there's the Dialogue Society, there's Axis, there's various organisations. These are charities that are there. The only organisation or the only element that is not there is the informal grassroots activism. That's an informal thing, and that's not there. You can't see it. But that's because social movements are based on informal activism. Having said that, we've discussed this with the colleagues here, and we're encouraging them to establish something called Sohbet Society, an organization, so that they can be seen and be more visible. Each of these organizations in themselves have their own hierarchies. So as the chairperson of the Dialogue Society, I will have a hierarchy within the Dialogue Society. But none of those organizational hierarchies trumps the other. It's about discussing and working. That's why this movement becomes widespread, because it avoids the problems of bureaucracy, and anyone that wants to do something can find a place to do it. It enables it to go expansive, but that's also why making decisions and getting everyone on board on things takes far longer.
If I may make a clarifying comment on your question. When sometimes media reporters or analysts make estimates of how much donations are involved or how much money is managed by the NGOs within the movement, they confuse the two kinds of financial assets. There are the assets of the NGOs, which are managed and owned by their boards, which could be considered legitimately as belonging to the movement. And then there are the business people, like the manufacturer that I mentioned or the mining company owners. Those are their own private assets. They choose to support the movement, but they became business people. They became wealthy by themselves without movement's involvement. They are just business people who chose to donate to the movement. So their assets, their personal or company assets, should not be considered as part of the movement. That would be inaccurate.
But if you've got, I think you said 2,000 schools all over the world?
Approximately.
Yes.
Yeah, prior to the shutdown in Turkey. This was 1,000 of them were in Turkey. They are all shut down right now. So only half of them remain outside of Turkey.
Doesn't that need a great deal of organisation?
Doesn't that lead, sorry?
Great deal of organisation.
If we think in the ways that corporations and companies usually work, then yes. But there is lattice, flat-based ways in which some companies do actually work, and social movements are actually based on that. They're not. That's where their strength comes. The moment they become very organisational. But that doesn't mean that there are no organisations in the movement. There are. That doesn't mean that there is no coordination in the movement. There is. That also doesn't mean that there's no hierarchy in the movement. There is. The point is that there is no single structure that connects all the elements and creates a top-down, centralised, which is the wording I use, a centralised system. That's what there isn't.
If I may add something, let's think about the schools in Turkey. We talk about, and the media talks about 1,000 schools. They are not really 1,000 separate independent schools. In some cases, there is a single foundation which owns, let's say, 50 campuses. So it's not that actually that many NGOs that are managing those institutions. So all of the schools, they belong to either a foundation or they used to belong to a foundation or a private company, and their operations were as transparent as any other school in Turkey.
Just on that point as well, the schools will network among themselves. I am the chairperson of the Dialogue Society, so I will be networked with other dialogue organisations that are Hizmet inspired around the world. So I will share. There is, by organisation, if we mean coordination, discussions, there is that. What there isn't is what we're saying is that there's something that encapsulates everything and it leads all the way up down. That is what is not it there.
So who's ultimately responsible for all these activities? Is it Gulen himself?
Gülen provided the motivation for it in the 1960s and 70s through his sermons when he said, we have enough mosques, we need schools, and we need non-denominational schools. So if we want to credit somebody for the idea, and then we credit Gülen for that. Again, with dialogue, when he said in the 1990s, we need to engage in dialogue, and we need to do it at an organisational level, people need to get involved. This needs to be long-lasting, not just a one-off ad hoc project. So if we want to credit him for those things in terms of the brainchild, then perhaps. But Gülen consciously avoids becoming a CEO of an organisation where he is the one that pulls the strings, because it's not possible. We're talking 160 countries with thousands of these various organisations. I mean, it's like the United Nations becoming that kind of, having that much reach and power. It's not possible. The people who are responsible, the people that found the organisation, so our trustees, whoever they are, of the Dialogue Society or Axis Trust, they are the ones that are responsible. Then the CEO of that organisation. That's how it is.
So who's the senior coordinator for the activities in the US and the UK? Who's the senior coordinator?
I mean, that's what we're saying. There is no single. But the UK example for me is clearer. We have voices in Britain. We declare who these organisations are. These organisations meet once a week or once every fortnight. All of the organisations are there. The major London organisations are there. What isn't there, as I mentioned, is the informal grassroots activity that's not represented on paper there. But a person from within that realm of work attends. And what does this person do? This person does something called bölgecilik, which means community grassroots outreach. He or she does sohbets, which means religious circles, religious counselling. This is what these people do. And the grassroots activism is a way of creating support for the other organisations. So some of the people that they meet with will support the Dialogue Society. So it's an important part of what we do. But social movements are predicated on informality. The moment you formalise everything, the moment you have the power to formalise everything, it's no longer really a social movement. So it hasn't been formalised in that sense. Also in Turkey, being a member of a religious organisation is still illegal. So there's a double incentive there not to go down that route. But given the pressures and also given the need to change somehow what we are, to make it clearer to people, we've been pressing on those that do this grassroots activism to formalise themselves into an organisation. Now people will look at something and they will often look at the thing that they think is less clear. So the critics will often go to that department and say, this is where it's all about. Whereas actually, they have their hierarchy within themselves, this sohbet society, but they don't have hierarchy over us or over one another. So there is no single senior person. I really do know that makes it difficult because of how we know how things work. But really, there are different ways of working, and that's why this is called a social movement, and that's why sociology has created this branch called social movements.
Daniel Kaplinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If this organisation is a charity, why is it actively seeking members from the highest levels of Turkish civil society and military structures?
I can give a historical background and you can add comments. So for those who are familiar with the history of Turkey, for decades Turkey has an official ideology which is enshrined in its constitution, and for decades citizens who did not publicly embrace that ideology have been seen as a suspect, and they have been discriminated against in hiring and promotion practices. This was continuing during the early years of Mr. Gülen's advocacy for education. And his point was that as religious observant citizens of this country, it is also our right to be present in the government institutions of our country. It is our constitutional right. But unless we have our children, our youth, qualifying for those positions, we will never get that chance. This was the initial motivation, the representation and presence of a large segment of the society in their government institutions. And accompanying this advocacy of presence and proportional representation was the upholding the rule of law, upholding the constitution, upholding the rules and regulations of the country. He was always clear in saying that if somebody is sympathetic to my views, if they disobey their superiors, or if they in any way violate the laws or act in an unethical way, that is in contradiction to what this movement stands for.
And it's about upward social mobility, as I've mentioned. I mean, it's important to understand the context in which Gülen was born and raised. And in the 1950s and 60s, when Gülen began to preach, there were glass ceilings not just above you, but to the side of you, where pious Muslims were encapsulated within certain professions and vocations. And Gülen's point was, that you have a right as a citizen to be in other places. You can't just be a patient that gets treated at the hospital. You can also be the doctor that does the treating at the hospital. You can't just be the witness that comes to the court of law and is cross-examined. You can be the judge or the lawyer that does the cross-examining. So Gülen's message there is all about upward social mobility and breaking.
But you have to be a citizen of your country and respect the laws of that.
And they are. Yeah. These people are. There is no law even now, even today, and even in Turkey, that says that somebody that is a Gülenist can't be a judge, can't be a lawyer. I mean, there is no law. Even today, I must impress this upon the committee. The term FETÖ is defamatory and it is unlawful, even in Turkey.
Right. Well, let me take you back to the question that the chairman asked before about loyalty, because this is a very important issue. Can you not see in any way, when you have this huge organisation spanning so many countries around the world, crossing jurisdictions and trying to spread its influence and ideology in other areas, can you, I mean, you're speaking in a very confident way, Mr. Kellis, but can you not see that some people might feel somewhat concerned or disturbed about that influence and how it might impact on some of the things that the local government is trying to do in terms of teaching children and educating them and doing all the other things that they feel they have a responsibility to do as the democratically elected institutions?
I can see a problem there.
You can?
Yes, but the problem with that is it goes both ways. The way to overcome that is full transparency and accountability. And to have transparency and accountability, you need to have a stable civil society where discrimination, profiling and controlling people does not happen. Where you have, in Turkey, the powers of profiling discrimination that are going on, you will have people that are reticent and worried about disclosing their identity. So, for example, the Alevi Turks, do they say in the state structure, the Alevi judge, do they say, I'm an Alevi judge? Does the Süleymani, which is a different religious group that has participants, do they declare it? Armenian Turks, are they comfortable saying who they are? Jewish Turks, do they do it? Ultranationalists that have an ideological, do they? None. Why? Because the powers of profiling, control and discrimination persist. It's like Ahmadinejad who said, we have no homosexuals in Iran. Can we then blame a homosexual that applies for an office in the Foreign Office in Iran for not declaring his homosexuality? We can't, because you've got the powers of profiling that persist. And this causes a problem for us. The movement tried to counter this. In 2012, it created a trade union for teachers and educators called Accusations. And it said, public and private teachers and educators, you can become members. 36,000 people became members of this trade union within 6-7 months. I would imagine that that's something that the government would have encouraged the Turkish government, because there you have it, transparency. Now you know. The government forced its closure in 2013, and now membership of that trade union is used as self-incrimination guilt. So we can't get to the bottom of this issue of ambiguity exists in Turkish civil society and Turkish state structure because of these powers of control and profiling and discrimination.
If I may add just a little thing to your question, it is definitely conceivable that certain governments might be concerned about such concerns as you expressed. But I should remind the committee that Hizmet movement has been around for almost 50 years now, and the educational institutions have been outside of Turkey established starting in the early 1990s. So at least in some countries, they have been around for at least 25 years. And it is, I think, conceivable that they have been monitored by their intelligence services, by their law enforcement agencies. And to our knowledge, no school, no education institution have been shut down for the kind of allegations that is now raised against the movement in Turkey.
Well, there are many countries around the world where you operate in where there are no problems, but you can acknowledge that there is a particular problem in Turkey at the moment. And has Mr. Gülen, to your knowledge, publicly dissociated himself with the attempted coup in Turkey? And would you encourage him to be more vocal about his condemnation of that?
Fethullah Gülen, yes, he has. On the night of the coup, there was a statement that was put out by the Alliance for Shared Values, which quoted Gulen, where he did condemn it. Within a few hours after that, another condemnation was issued by Fethullah Gülen. So Fethullah Gülen has condemned it and denied his involvement. For the 3 following days, on the 16th, 17th and 18th of July, Fethullah Gülen gave 3 press conferences to the world's media where he answered over 40 questions put to him about the coup, where he denied it over and over again. And then for the weeks following, he issued further condemnation. So Gulen has said, I have nothing to do with it. He said that I have been persecuted by coup. I mean, the statement that Mr. Chair read was a statement that was used against Gulen by the postmodern coup plotters in 1997. So Gülen himself has said in the 1970s he was jailed following a coup when so many people were put behind bars. So Gülen has said he has suffered from coups, he is absolutely against it, he condemns it, he denies it, and he said, I call on an international commission to go and investigate this. If they find they find my involvement or any involvement of the movement as an entity, he said, I won't wait for the extradition. I'll buy my own ticket and I'll fly out there myself.
So my last question is, why is it that so many of our Turkish compatriots feel, and actually independent witnesses that we've already witnessed here from the United Kingdom, why is it that people feel that this movement has been involved in the coup?
We have become, sadly, a convenient scapegoat. And this is, sadly, how our Turkish government operates. During the summer 2013 Gezi Park protests, I think you'll recall, in Turkey, where there was these nationwide protests that started off with the removal of a piece of parkland in central Istanbul. The president, who was then the prime minister, said, this is the planning and masterminding of the international interest rate lobby, which is euphemism for the Jewish lobby. And he said the domestic partners of this international interest rate lobby are the Koch conglomerate. The Koch conglomerate produce the Beko washing machines, which Boris Johnson, our foreign minister, loves so much, and which is, in fact, a good product. He said it's the Koch conglomerate that are the domestic partners. Now, within Turkish Islamists believe that the Koch family are of Jewish descent. It's rumoured among the Islamists there. So he created this narrative in order to be able to undertake the draconian measures. This is how it operates. So now we have become the favoured scapegoat. There are a number of reasons why that is. One of them that the movement, a bit like the HDP party, refused to support the president's executive presidency bid when he was putting that out there. Number two, the movement has become increasingly critical of President Erdogan and the government from 2010 onwards, and Erdogan wants to silence critics, as we see happening today in Turkey. You then have political Islam versus civil Islam. Erdogan's reverted back to this instrumentalization of religion in politics, and in his view, he has to monopolize and colonize. I mean, that's how he's constructed political Islam. And as a credible alternative voice that provides a different worldview on these matters, we become a group that needs to be silenced and removed. But also, one of the reasons is that we fulfill the everywhere effect illusion so good. I mean, we're so good for that. And what I mean by this is that on the night of the coup, organized by members of the military, within 6 hours, 2,750 members of the judiciary were removed. Well, how did he do that? He did that by using us as the scapegoat, because before the purge, we had so many schools around the place, there were so many TV networks. So the idea that the movement was everywhere was a plausible illusion. So he would go from one sector to another sector, and we would allow him to do that because of the impression that we had given prior to this purge. So there's this, and of course he genuinely does believe, I believe, that the corruption scandals that broke out in 2013 were...
Try and get this session finished before we have another division. Mark Hendrick.
Were Gulenist prosecutors involved in helping the AKP to remove hostile figures in the military and the judiciary after the AKP first came to power?
I can give an initial answer. During the trials in the following 2008 of military officers, there were different perspectives on those trials in Turkish society and within the movement as well. As far as I and my friends within the movement, we were concerned, we supported those trials on the principle of if there have been military coups in Turkey, there have been disappearances, torture cases, Diyarbakir prison and Ankara, there was one prison in Ankara where leftists were tortured, allegedly tortured. There were such cases, disappearances, and despite these coups and all the human rights abuses, not a single officer faced a civilian court. So our support was based on the principle that if there are these allegations and accusations, they should, the alleged officer should at least face the court. This was the principle. However, in the execution of these trials, apparently there were violations of individuals' rights, which at that time some of my friends in the media and intellectual circles, they have objected to. But unfortunately, there was not an outcry within the movement against those excesses of the trials. So that's what I can say.
So yes. Did Gulenist prosecutors target the AKP with corruption allegations in 2013? And also, did the prosecutors attempt to have Turkey's intelligence chief arrested in 2013?
Dr. Erdogan.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not possible to answer those questions right now, especially the first one, because those cases were closed down. The prosecutors in charge of the probes were first removed from that probe and then removed from their offices and then jailed. The whole process was shut down. Many other judges, prosecutors, and police officers and detectives were imprisoned. So that whole process was shut down. So we will never know the answer unless.
Well, you might not know the facts, but what's your belief? What do you believe?
Well, I have not seen evidence of those processes going beyond the rule of law by the international standards.
Also, the cases, some of these cases were backdated 2 years. So the narrative that's been created is that something was going well and then it broke down and then the AKP moved against the movement and then the movement initiated these corruption investigations. Well, they started 2 years ago. I mean, we found out about it collectively as the world on December 2013. They didn't begin December 2013. There's also a memo that was issued by the National Intelligence Services to the President, who was then the Prime Minister, to say there is a certain individual with whom your ministers have unhealthy relationships. This will cause a headache for you. The government has inadvertently admitted to the authenticity of this document by now trying the journalists that leaked that for leaking state secrets. So the fact that there was corruption and this document by the National Intelligence Services was sent to the Prime Minister 8 months before this. Furthermore, Reza Zarraf, the gentleman around whom most of these corruption investigations circulate, is now being tried on the very basis of these corruption investigations by the United States Attorney. So projective thinking, when we go back to this and try to look at this and project the movement onto this, anything can be projected onto it. But we have to then look at it independently and say what the evidence is. The government would have us believe that in 2009-2010, the movement arrested 1,000 of the Kurdish union's politicians to prevent the peace process from going on. That's what the narrative was. Well, we now know, don't we, that that's quite impossible because President Erdogan is somebody that micromanages, is a very strong leader. Do you think that the movement's police officers could arrest over 1,000 Kurdish politicians associated with the KCK?
I wonder if we can just get to the question that Mr. Hendrick asked, which is quite narrow. Did Gulenist prosecutors target the AKP with corruption allegations in 2013? Yes or no?
This is a question about the intentions of the prosecutors. We cannot say anything to their intentions. We have to look at their actions.
Supporters or sympathisers.
If you're asking, Mr. Chairman,
whether
it's possible, of course it's possible.
I was asking whether you believe that's the case. Were they Gulenist supporters?
No, I do not believe that because that goes against that buys into the narrative that the Gulenist people have infiltrated the police, the judiciary, the political establishment to a degree, to the media, so that they could pull something like this off. And right, I don't find that plausible at all. It's likely that this was investigated by a group of people that had begun this from before, not knowing how far it would go, and found them where they were. Saying yes to that question accepts the narrative, and I find the narrative to be to not be plausible.
Well, let's finish with a narrative and see what your comments on it are. It's fairly plain that from 2010 onwards, what had been a previously close relationship between the AKP and the movement began to collapse, and the narrative would be that in the attempts of Gulenist-minded prosecutors to go after the intelligence chief in 2012, followed by going after the AKP itself for corruption within the judiciary. Order. We'll come back at 25 past, and I hope we will then finish. We'll then only 5 more minutes, and then we'll be on to the next session. Sitting suspended. Resume the session, and just the final questions to our witnesses from me. I was putting to you the narrative, really, and I invite you to just to see how far you go with me with this narrative. That the relationship between the AKP and the movement had been actually pretty positive and cooperative pretty much up until 2010. There was an alignment of interest, particularly about bringing a potential threat from Kemalists. They've been brought to justice in the trials you mentioned would have been supported by both the movement and by the AKP itself. Are you with me? Are you with me so far? That's a reasonable.
I do have my
proposition.
comments on those premises.
But if it's broadly the case.
I would like to say that the premise of AKP in their party program when they first ran for election are the reasons why they received the movement support, which is extending human rights and freedoms, stopping government profiling of citizens, and moving in the direction of the European Union.
But I think, as you said, that from 2010 onwards, the positions began to diverge, and quite seriously in 2012 and 2013, with the questions put by Mr. Hendrick about the association of the Gulenists with the prosecution of cases against the AKP for corruption for people quite close to Mr. Erdogan, and of course the attempt to prosecute the intelligence chief. And at that point, then relations became entirely fractured between the movement and the administration, and that's when the administration then began to go after the movement really quite heavily. Is that a reasonable description?
I think it is partially true, partially I think inaccurate. We have to remember that the movement dates back to the 60s. So there have been multiple political parties which received the support of movement participants before AKP was formed. And they have received the support of movement participants for the same reasons, by and large. These were promising to further democratize Turkey, expanding human rights and freedoms, and moving Turkey in the direction of the European Union, which is also seen as a guarantee for Turkish democracy to consolidate. And for the early years of AKP, the reason for the support was the same. And when the movement split with the AKP, the reason was also the same. Because AKP policies eventually culminating in a sharp U-turn, they began to diverge from the original premises, and then they culminated in a U-turn from their initial premises. Especially the insistence on the executive presidency was a milestone event. And this was not known publicly until it was mentioned publicly, but it was going on behind the scenes.
So the movement has broken with the AKP. The movement has organized itself as a kind of secret society for the reasons you explained about the nature of Turkish society, where people are not entitled to be religious at some point, and to have a religious affiliation, that would be career limiting, to put it mildly. And then to a degree, over the period the movement has been around, it has overcompensated in terms of keeping its identity secret, and the lack of transparency about who belongs to it, and therefore particularly in the military and the senior ranks of the civil service and the judiciary. And there was then a culture of promoting people within the movement into key positions. But this then became the movement coming under critical pressure in 2013, 14, 15, and the rhetoric being wound up by the administration against the movement, that what that actually finally led to was the movement deciding to roll the dice. And you rolled the dice on the 15th of July.
I understand the premise.
We do not accept this narrative.
No, I didn't think you were going to sign up to it. I'm inviting what is, in that sense, what is.
Sure. It's far more. I mean,
what is wrong with that?
Okay. Did the movement support? Was there an ideological alliance? No, there was not. The movement's position on EU and freedom and human rights, whatnot, democracy, has always been clear, and it has always opposed identity politics and political Islam. This is from the very early on. The movement's always been of that view. The movement did not come closer to the AKP. The AKP was formed on the rejection of identity politics and political Islam and came closer to the movement, point one. Point number two, the AKP came into power in 2001 of their own volition, out of the political dynamics that were prevailing at the time. Most of the mainstream parties couldn't get into the parliament. They got the vote. It had nothing to do with the movement's support whatsoever. The movement then supported them for the first 2 terms, that is correct. It supported them through their media, through Zaman, through the TV, and most of the participants would have gone along and supported that as a result of that kind of coverage that they saw in the media associated with the movement. That is correct. But that is also the time when the religious minorities in Turkey were supporting them, when some of the liberals were supporting them, when the EU and the US were endorsing them. That is the point. Now, the movement then realized that our president had particular ambitions and disagreed with him on that, and said we're not in favor of this. Not necessarily in a literal way, but nonetheless that point was made on the issue of the executive presidency. Now, our former Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoğlu has seen what happens when you don't fully 100% support the executive presidency. You're removed. The HDP party, about whom I think you'll be hearing later on, whom was engaged in a peace process with the AKP, and a very important and a good peace process, has found itself now with its leaders in jail because it has opposed predominantly this executive presidency. So the movement's position there, and for reasons that I explained earlier, has diverged. It was against the authoritarianism. And
but you're then under the cosh of an increasingly authoritarian government.
Yes.
Your people are being identified. The trade union. You talked about the education trade union people had joined.
Correct.
And then there is obviously a certain amount of discomfort amongst the Kemalists. And those two
and others
about the direction Turkey is taking is very controversial.
Yes.
This committee was very critical of the direction of Turkish policy when we published a report in February this year.
Yes.
And then what then happened on the 15th of July was the movement, with any other allies it could find, then rolled the dice on a last-ditch effort to rescue itself and, in its own eyes, Turkey from this administration.
No, the problem with that...
Well, let Dr.
Our organization actually prepared a document sharing perspectives of either observers or intellectuals on what happened during the coup in Turkey. We do not have the full knowledge of what really happened that night. There are certain objective things like our condemnation and denial of involvement consciously by Mr. Gülen and his associates. But the exact nature of what happened and who were involved is not clear to anybody besides people who are keeping...
who do you think?
So we have,
that's my
shared,
final question, so we need to get on to our...
So we have shared some of the
question.
perspectives that we find reasonable in our document, and these are independent experts based in UK and United States, which talk about the possible groups, possible segments of the military who might have been involved. So we share these perspectives in our document. We based on the expertise of those individuals, we find them reasonable.
Okay. Thank you both very much indeed for coming to answer the committee's questions today. I'm very, very grateful, obviously, to trouble Dr. Azan Hunt for coming from the United States, and Mr. Kelesh. Thank you very much for your evidence.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
I'm going to invite. We'll break for 2 minutes, and then I'll invite Anklu to take a chair in my absence. Order.